Chapter 3, Succession. January 1992, Palm Beach, Florida. The Wexner estate on North Ocean Boulevard stood stark, its manicured lawns sloping to the Atlantic's edge, the air heavy with salt and fresh sod. Bought in 1985 for $10 million from Jane Reitzman, the French Regency mansion, Maison de l'Amitié, spanned 270,000 square feet, with 492 feet of ocean frontage. Zoning disputes over a Worth Avenue limited store had driven Les Wexner to sell it to Abe Gossman for $12.1 million in 1988, leaving a half-built tennis pavilion and unfinished plans. In January 1992, the property sat in limbo, its air sharp with sawdust and sea spray, a stage for quiet deals. Jeffrey Epstein stepped from a black town car onto the crushed shell drive, his sweater and jeans casual against the estate's faded grandeur, the breeze carrying gull cries. Ghislaine Maxwell followed, wool coat cinched, her poise masking unease from her father's death 3 months prior, his chaotic legacy of secrets now hers. The meeting was no social call, it was to expand the Vault's American node beyond the compromised 69th Street townhouse, its lease under State Department scrutiny. Wexner's Palm Beach estate, underused, was a foothold for Florida's elite. Les Wexner waited on the veranda, rigid in a linen shirt, eyes sharp behind glasses, more at ease in Ohio boardrooms than this sunlit exile. The table held iced tea and sweating glasses, no staff present, privacy absolute. Epstein shook his hand, grip firm, Wexner's return calculated. Jeffrey, Ghislaine, Wexner said, voice even, gesturing to wicker chairs by the ocean's murmur. Palm Beach is small, why are you here? Ghislaine sat, pouring tea, ice clinking, her smile practiced but eyes wary, her Herzliya training thin against the vault's weight. Epstein leaned forward. Les, 69th Street's hot. Auditors sniffing Iranian ties, lease untenable, we need space with influence, ocean frontage, elite circles, this estate's idle. Abigail's in Ohio, you're done here. Let us use it. Wexner's jaw tightened, fingers drumming, the unspoken heavy. Epstein held leverage, Wexner's hidden indiscretions buried in ledgers, a threat to L. Brand's facade. The 1991 power of attorney was Wexner's concession, Epstein's control a quiet chokehold. Palm Beach was a mistake, Wexner said, eyes on the waves. Zoning fights, town politics. I sold to Gossman, he's sinking in debt. I can arrange a transfer, shell to shell, what's the plan? Epstein's smile was faint. Access, privacy, the estate as a hub secure for guests, cameras in sconces, mics in floors, a basement archive. Wexner Foundation covers contractors, Israeli suppliers through your channels. Ghislaine cut in, accent crisp. It's about proximity, LS. Worth Avenue donors, yacht charters. The vault needs Florida, and you need our leverage. Wexner's eyes flicked between them, the ocean's rhythm underscoring his silence, his secrets a chain Epstein forged years ago. The estate was a gateway to Palm Beach's elite, a node for leverage amid galas and golf. Gossman's desperate, Wexner said. I'll arrange it, trust transfer, your name as trustee. Keep renovations quiet, no zoning issues. Files stay out of Ohio. Epstein nodded, deal sealed in silence, Ghislaine's smile hiding her dread, the vault's mantle heavy, her father's web hers to navigate. February 1992, Manhattan, New York. The townhouse at 34 East 69th Street stood as a relic of faded diplomacy, its limestone facade dusted with the neglect of a post-revolution Iranian mission abandoned after 1979. 4 stories of quiet menace. It was technically government-owned, but the paperwork had been misplaced or deliberately lost by the State Department, leaving it a ghost address perfect for new occupants. Jeffrey Epstein stepped from a black sedan, his breath clouding in the unseasonably warm February air, his smile slight, satisfied. This was no purchase, it was a placement, a favor cloaked in bureaucratic oversight. A CIA courier badge clipped to his coat handed him a key from a leather folder embossed with a State Department seal, offering no name, only a handshake and a nod. The lease, tied to a shell company with no traceable origin, was immaculate, the townhouse a canvas for Epstein's ambitions, a stage for the vault's next chapter. Inside, hardwood floors creaked beneath marble thresholds, a rolled Persian rug in the foyer like a forgotten relic. Epstein moved through the rooms, his steps deliberate, inspecting corners as if mapping a chessboard. No cameras yet, but he envisioned their placement, corridors of leverage, walls to frame whispers. A moving truck arrived an hour later, plain wooden crates with no markings carried by silent men following a clipboard's orders. In the basement, a contractor in a camel hair coat knelt by electrical panels, muttering about shielded conduits and lines that never touched, Con Ed, as cash bundles were counted on a kitchen counter and swept into a satchel. Ghislaine Maxwell arrived mid-afternoon, her black wool coat heavy despite the warmth, her hair twisted into a knot, no luggage in hand. She paced the rooms with an appraising gait, fingertips trailing along window casings, tapping walls and floorboards for sound. The deep-set windows and thick plaster pleased her, not for aesthetics but for their ability to mute. On the second floor she paused at a window overlooking the street, heavy curtains pulled at her feet. "It will work," she said, her voice calm, almost detached, but her eyes burned with purpose. Epstein met her gaze, silent, their shared mission unspoken but palpable, a pact forged in the wake of Robert Maxwell's fall. The townhouse was no home, it was a machine, built to receive and secure information, recordings, people. By nightfall, work crews returned with tool cases and unmarked vans, easing paneling from walls, threading wires through hidden cavities. In the master suite, sun filtered through dusty silk drapes, casting long shadows across a polished mahogany table. Epstein opened a window, inhaling the air of official disuse. Below, a man with a newspaper glanced up, nodded faintly, and vanished into the steam of a passing bus. Epstein recognized the choreography of surveillance, his role as both player and pawn in a game he was now shaping. Ghislaine set a heavy box on the table, its thud echoing against high ceilings, dust falling like ash. She opened it slowly, revealing yellowing faxes, burned-edge telegrams, contact sheets, and coded logs in Robert Maxwell's blocky handwriting, transcripts without names, surveillance photos of men now running governments, a hand-drawn floor plan of a Geneva bank. "This is the good stuff," she said, tossing a sealed envelope to Epstein. He sliced it open with a letter opener shaped like a dagger, finding a 1987 photo of Maxwell with a Saudi prince on a yacht, a note on the back, "Tell them it's not just the Americans watching." "Why give this to me?" Epstein asked, his voice low, nursing a glass of white. "Bordeaux, because you'll know what to do with it," Ghislaine replied, sinking into a velvet chair, her eyes scanning the disarray. "If I kept it, I'd become him." Epstein laid the documents out like a strategist placing pieces, his fingers lingering on the photo. "Your father was a collector, information, people, debts, but he never learned to use them without destruction." He looked up, his gaze steady. "We will—" Ghislaine's smile flickered, a memory or warning unvoiced, as the HVAC kicked in, the house creaking. Robert Maxwell's death 3 months prior, in November 1991, had left a void, creditors circling, Tel Aviv lines silent, the vault's levers unattended. His empire, once a sprawling network of media and intelligence, had crumbled under its own weight, his threats of insurance documents in Lisbon and Geneva marking him as a liability. Mossad had phased him out, his yacht accident a convenient end, and Epstein, with his cipher-like resume and knack for hidden wealth, had been positioned to inherit. Ghislaine, trained in Herzlier's annexes, was his equal in charm and ruthlessness, her transition from daughter to operative complete. They were not replacing Maxwell, they were refining his machine, turning chaos into precision. A week earlier, Epstein had met a former Mossad handler in a midtown cafe, the man's accent thick, his instructions clear, the vault continues. "You run the American node, keep the lines open, the debt's collectible." Epstein had nodded, accepting a folder of coded contacts, bankers in Zurich, fixers in London, diplomats in Riyadh, each a thread in the vault's web. Ghislaine, fresh from a Geneva meeting with a French-Algerian intermediary, had secured a Promise software update, its back doors now feeding data to a server in Tel Aviv, every transaction a potential lever. The first guest arrived via referral, a 17-year-old with brittle confidence, her modeling portfolio, a plastic binder of department store shots. Ghislaine met her at the door, clipboard in hand, her British accent slicing through the stale air. "Lovely," she purred, leading the girl to the drawing room where Epstein waited, jazz on the stereo lighting soft. "Jeff," he said, offering his hand, his blazer unbuttoned. "You've got a great look. Ever done catalogue work?" "Some," the girl said, unsure. "For a friend's boutique in Jersey, perfect. We're building a portfolio for a private client." Ghislaine stepped in, her tone instructive but sweet. "You'll be paid and we'll connect you with a real agency once we have shots to show." The session was quick, poses, off-shoulder shots, then upstairs for personal photos, the newly installed cameras blinking silently. By the time the girl left, Epstein had her friends' names. That evening, in the kitchen, Ghislaine poured scotch, lit a cigarette and handed him a Polaroid. She didn't ask who the client was, she said, exhaling slowly. "They never do," Epstein replied, studying the photo like a rare card. "Not if you make it about their future." Ghislaine tapped ash into a ceramic bowl. "Daddy said the easiest person to con is someone chasing a dream that doesn't exist yet." Epstein raised his glass. "To invention, then, and reinvention," she added, her smile sharp. They drank in silence, the hum of hidden cameras ticking behind the walls, wires threading through the townhouse's veins, ready to capture girls, guests, secrets, all for the vault's endless archive. The handover was complete, Maxwell's chaotic legacy distilled into Epstein and Ghislaine's precise machine, a new node in the vault's network, its levers now theirs to pull. In Herzliya, a system pinged, new asset installed. East 69 payload active, succession attempt in progress. March 1992. Two Mossad-linked contractors arrived in Manhattan under diplomatic cover in the first week of the month, their names absent from any manifest. The first, a wiry man with a faint Eastern European accent specialized in low-frequency directional audio, his equipment capable of isolating whispers from across a room. The second, younger, with a meticulous demeanor, had pioneered miniaturized lens arrays in Herzliya's tech labs, his cameras small enough to vanish into sconces. They worked nights, moving through the townhouse like ghosts, their tools concealed in unmarked cases. Small cameras were embedded above doorframes, their lenses glinting like hidden eyes. Microphones, tuned to capture tone and stress, were tucked beneath floorboards, their wires snaking through cavities no inspector would find. Infrared sensors lined the stairwell, logging motion signatures, gait, weight, hesitation, each a unique fingerprint of intent. No room was spared, not even the bathrooms, their tiles concealing sensors that hummed with silent vigilance. In the basement, the contractors built a vault, not the vault itself, but a node in its sprawling network. No flashing servers or humming drives, just hard-shell crates lined with static damp blankets, each labeled in glyphic shorthand, destined for duplication and dispersal to secure sites in Tel Aviv and beyond. A small incinerator hid behind a false wall, its chute ready to erase evidence in a breath of flame, a Faraday cage embedded in the brick shielded sensitive equipment from external signals. An escape hatch, once a diplomatic relic, was reinforced and disguised as part of the boiler system, its existence known only to Epstein and Ghislaine. The setup was surgical, designed for permanence, a cathedral of surveillance cloaked as a residence. From the outside, the townhouse regained its residential veneer. Persian rugs, cleaned and unrolled, softened the hardwood floors. Books, carefully curated for appearance, filled polished shelves. A Rothko reproduction hung on the second-floor landing, its muted reds bleeding into the dim light. An antique globe bar, stocked with Armagnac and aged scotch, stood in the parlor's corner, its wood gleaming with fresh polish. The illusion was complete, tasteful, unremarkable, a home for a financier with eclectic tastes. But the phone lines ran through a private exchange, mail diverted through two forwarding services, and guests entered via a garden-level side door, often under aliases. Those who stayed overnight rarely recalled who else had shared the space, their memories blurred by jazz, low lighting, and Ghislaine's practiced charm. Epstein arrived mid-month, his fingerprints absent from the lease, his presence a shadow in the paperwork. He moved through the rooms, inspecting the contractor's work, his fingers tracing the edges of sconces where cameras hid. "Clean," he murmured, his voice low, satisfied. Ghislaine followed, her black wool coat shed for a tailored blazer, her eyes scanning for flaws. In the master suite, sunlight filtered through silk drapes, casting shadows across a mahogany table where a heavy box rested, its contents inherited from Robert Maxwell's shattered empire, yellowing faxes, coded logs, surveillance photos, a 1987 image of Maxwell with a Saudi prince, a note scrawled. On the back, "Tell M it's not just the Americans watching." These were the vault's raw materials, leveraged to be refined. In Herzliya, a secure room buzzed with the hum of servers, a junior officer logging the townhouse's activation. American node, Grey Vault, operational. The report was also tagged EAST 69th node active. A senior handler, his accent clipped, reviewed intercepts from a midtown cafe meeting where Epstein had met a former Mossad contact, securing coded contacts, Zurich bankers, London fixers, Riyadh diplomats. Ghislaine, fresh from Geneva, had finalized a Promise software update, its backdoors feeding data to Tel Aviv, each transaction a potential lever. The officer scribbled a note, "Succession stable." Maxwell legacy contained. Robert Maxwell's death had been a necessity, his threats of insurance documents a liability that Mossad had neutralized. Epstein and Ghislaine were the new architects, their partnership a seamless pivot from chaos to precision. Back in Manhattan, a referral brought the first guest, an 18-year-old model, her portfolio a plastic binder of department store shots, her confidence brittle from years of being told she was beautiful too soon. Ghislaine met her at the side door, clipboard in hand, her British accent slicing through the stale air. "Lovely," she purred, leading the girl to the drawing room where Epstein waited, jazz on the stereo, lighting soft. "Jeff," he said, his blazer unbuttoned, his smile disarming. "You've got a great look. Ever done catalog work?" "Some," the girl said, unsure, "for a friend's boutique in Jersey." "Perfect. We're building a portfolio for a private client." Ghislaine's tone was instructive, sweet. "You'll be paid and we'll connect you with a real agency once we have shots to show." The session was quick. Poses, off-shoulder shots, then upstairs for personal photos, the cameras blinking silently. By the time the girl left, Epstein had her friends' names. That evening, in the kitchen, Ghislaine poured scotch, lit a cigarette, and handed him a Polaroid. She didn't ask who the client was, she said, exhaling slowly. They never do, Epstein replied, studying the photo like a rare card. Not if you make it about their future. Ghislaine tapped ash into a ceramic bowl. Daddy said the easiest person to con is someone chasing a dream that doesn't exist yet. Epstein raised his glass. To invention, then, and reinvention, she added, her smile sharp. They drank in silence, the hum of hidden cameras ticking behind the walls, wires threading through the townhouse's veins. The vault's new node was alive, capturing girls, guests, secrets, all for its endless archive. Maxwell's chaotic legacy, his media empire, his reckless threats, had been distilled into Epstein and Ghislaine's precise machine, a partnership forged to outlast him. In Herzliya, a system pinged, succession confirmed, no exposure. April 1992, Manhattan, New York. The townhouse on East 69th Street stood as a silent fortress, its limestone facade polished to mask the chaos of its reinvention. Once an Iranian diplomatic outpost, it was now a perfect shell for Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's ambitions. The April air was crisp, carrying the faint bloom of spring, but inside, the scent was of fresh solder, plaster dust, and the ozone hum of new wiring. 3 months after Robert Maxwell's death in November 1991, his sprawling empire of media and intelligence had collapsed, his reckless threats of insurance documents silenced by a staged yacht accident. Epstein and Ghislaine, anointed as the Grey Vault's new curators, were transforming the townhouse into a nerve center, a node in a network that thrived on leverage. A black Lincoln town car with diplomatic plates idled at the curb, disgorging a burnished Louis Vuitton steamer trunk, its brass latches dulled by decades of privilege, its monogrammed leather faded to the hue of old sunlight. A private security courier, silent and expressionless, carried it up the steps, leaving without acknowledgement. Ghislaine followed, her face shadowed under a dark felt cloche, trench coat singed against the late winter wind, her heels clicking across the marble foyer with the confidence of someone who owned the silence. Epstein waited at the top of the stairs, hands in his pockets, lips pressed into a smile too knowing to be warm. "Welcome home," he said, his tone laced with a flirty edge. Ghislaine didn't reply, her gaze sweeping the foyer's sterile opulence, black and white marble tiles, mirrors multiplying every angle, a porcelain rabbit on a side table glinting like a decoy. She paused on it, then moved on, her eyes catching the faint red blink of a camera embedded in a sconce. Epstein nodded toward the trunk. "Is this it?" She gave a single blink, unclasping the top latch, the leather creaking. "Look what I brought," she said, her voice dry. Beneath a layer of lingerie, blouses, and summer dresses lay order masked as chaos, red ribbons tied around foolscap bundles, smudged carbon copies of 1980 seconds telegrams, photographs in waxed paper, ledger books stamped in Hebrew and Cyrillic, microfilm-coded contact lists, private intelligence memos bearing seals of defunct governments. At the bottom, a velvet pouch held a flash drive labeled in Robert Maxwell's handwriting. "Do not trust the British. You shouldn't have traveled with this," Epstein said, his voice low, fingers brushing a telegram. "I like to live on the edge," Ghislaine replied, pulling a cigarette from her coat, lighting it without asking. "I brought the nuclear codes." They laughed, the smoke drifting into the hall's silence, a shared jest masking the weight of their inheritance. The trunk was carried to Epstein's suite, where Ghislaine unpacked her personal items, hanging dresses in a closet, slipping lingerie into a drawer with casual intimacy. The sensitive materials remained. The trunk returned to the foyer by a silent butler, lingering for minutes before Epstein signaled its transfer to the basement archive. Mossad-installed gear hummed there, cameras and microphones calibrated, a vault of hard-shell crates lined with static damp blankets, each labeled in glyphic shorthand for dispersal to Tel Aviv. A small incinerator hid behind a false wall, a Faraday cage shielded signals, an escape hatch disguised as boiler piping. The men in the shadows understood, the heiress had arrived, and she carried the syndicate's future. In the renovated kitchen, clinical under halogen lights, steel counters gleamed like a private hospital. 2 crystal glasses rested near an uncorked Chateau Latour, its label peeling from handling. Ghislaine sat barefoot, her button-down shirt unbuttoned to reveal a glimpse of cleavage, sleeves rolled, legs tucked under her, hair damp from a late bath, a silk robe draped over her chair. The vault's materials, Maxwell's legacy, lay strewn across the island. Folders, contact sheets, yellowing envelopes in multiple languages, some bearing stamps of agencies still active. A thick file, codenamed Kestrel, held grainy photos of a U.S. senator in Corsica, shirtless, laughing, kneeling between 2 underage women, unaware of the lens. "These were his training wheels," Ghislaine said, swirling her wine, watching sediment collect. "My father had a theory. 2 currencies never devalue, secrets and sex. He trafficked in both. Epstein, shirt open to the sternum, leaned over the file, his eyes scanning with mechanical calm. Sex wasn't the economy, it was the index. Ghislaine raised an eyebrow. So what's the currency? Compromat, Epstein said, tapping the folder. Documentation, reproducible guilt, usable shame, she smirked. A futures market. Exactly, he said. Power has no loyalty. Shame, handled right, bears interest. Consent's irrelevant. It's about recording what they won't admit. The footage doesn't need release. Just filing. He slid a document her way. A 1980s Buenos Aires memo on MI6 stationery, detailing payments to a colonel later indicted for war crimes. Maxwell's penciled note. Make this disappear before the Times gets it. They nodded, not in agreement but familiarity. A private dialect of those who watched others forget. The house, half complete, was a weapon, rooms for strategy, walls for listening, beds for procurement. Ghislaine touched his hand, brief, intentional. He stood, pulling her close, their kiss deep, urgent, a seal of their pact. Shall we? She murmured, pulling back. He nodded, and they moved to the bedroom, the air charged with their shared reinvention. In Langley, a secure room buzzed with servers, a junior officer logging the townhouse's progress. E69 Thake node active. Succession stable. A senior handler reviewed intercepts from Epstein's Midtown meeting with a former Mossad contact, securing coded contacts, Zurich bankers, London fixers, Riyadh diplomats. Ghislaine's Geneva trip had upgraded promise, its backdoors feeding Tel Aviv, every transaction a lever. The handler noted, Maxwell legacy contained, no exposure. By late April, young women arrived via coded ads and referrals, modeling scouts, PR internships, whispered promises of good money. Ghislaine greeted them at the side door, her smile cultured. Precise, you have a European face, you carry yourself like a diplomat. The sessions were innocuous at first, posture tests, conversation role-play, Ghislaine correcting diction and gait. Epstein watched via closed feed, buzzing comments, she's flat-footed. Not for international rooms, less smiling, fix her hesitation. Photos followed, Polaroids, then film, Epstein positioning them like props, chin tilted, shoulder bare, blouse undone. High fashion requires trust, he said, his voice soft, distant. The third-floor suite, retrofitted with floodlights and velvet furniture, hid a mirror that wasn't a mirror, a camera humming behind a bookshelf. Scripts guided the girls through screen tests for European agencies, their discomfort soothed by Ghislaine's firm assurances. You're being discovered. Each movement was catalogued, voices recorded. Backup synced between Langley and Herzliya, via encrypted channels, dual-factor keys, hashed routes. Metadata, not contracts, defined the operation. By May, the townhouse operated as a boutique embassy, its residents rotating, guests unsigned, their futures pixelated into the Grey Vault's archive. No scandal yet, just leverage. May 1992. Bexley, Ohio. The Scioto River glimmered beyond the glass walls of Les Wexner's Columbus office, a sleek perch where blueprints for New Albany, his envisioned utopian enclave, lay unrolled across polished oak desks. Jeffrey Epstein stepped from a chauffeured sedan, briefcase in hand, suit tailored sharp against the morning light. At 39, he navigated rooms with the precision of a cartographer, his gaze locking on Wexner at the desk's center, a retail titan whose empire, the limited Victoria's Secret, spun cotton into billions. Wexner, 54, broad-shouldered but softened by success, leaned over a map, tie navy, hair combed back. The introduction came via Douglas Lease, a defense contractor with British arms ties. Over a prior call, Les, meet Jeffrey. He makes problems vanish. Wexner's handshake was firm, eyes weighing Epstein like a supplier. Value, risk, costs. Vanish how? Wexner asked, Ohio vowels blunt. Epstein's smile was calculated. Offshore, trusts, where the IRS can't touch. Wexner's laugh, deep and unguarded, began a subtle web. Epstein arrived with a bottle of 1987 Chateau Lafite, a nod to Wexner's taste for lasting luxury. Les, you're crafting a dynasty, he said, gesturing to the New Albany plans, voice smooth as the river outside. Dynasties need walls. I'll build them tighter than your lawyers. Wexner, facing $1.8 billion in debts from the Limited's buyouts and whispers of divorce from Abigail, leaned back, chair creaking, skepticism a barrier. Epstein chipped away with precision. He pitched Cayman shells and Liechtenstein trusts, shields against IRS audits and Abigail's legal filings circling Ohio courts. Wexner tested him with a $500,000 transfer to a Bermuda account, watching it re-emerge clean in a Swiss vault. You're a shadow, Wexner said over cigars at the Columbus Club, eyes bright with evasion's thrill. Epstein raised his glass. Shadows leave no footprints. Their bond grew in the office's quiet, Epstein's visits regular, each a performance of loyalty. He framed New Albany as Wexner's legacy, but targeted the man. His empire strained by post-Gulf War economic ripples, divorce rumors a legal blade. Epstein's trusts promised protection, each transfer, clean and untouchable, building trust. Wexner's reliance deepened, not just financial but personal. Epstein a confidant in a city demanding accountability. Over dinner at the Columbus Club, river lights glinting through windows, Epstein spoke of dynasties, his voice allure, Wexner nodding, cigar smoke thick. Their pact sealed in silence, a web tightening around a billionaire's vulnerabilities, Epstein's charm weaving control in a world of scrutiny. May 1992, Palm Beach, Florida. The air was warm with salt and champagne. Mar-a-Lago, in its full theatrical splendor, pulsed under the weight of a curated crowd. Trust fund heirs, minor celebrities, foreign students in borrowed gowns, and the elite of West Palm's real estate and finance circuits. Beneath the glow of chandeliers and the refracted gleam of oversized mirrors, a different kind of spectacle was unfolding, a masquerade disguised as opportunity. The ballroom smelled of chlorine and perfume, windows dripping condensation. Georgia Rainey delivered 28 women, bronzed, young, calendar-ready. Trump and Epstein the only guests prowled. Trump pointed, "This one has potential." Epstein laughed, leaning close. An NBC camera caught it, tape later buried. Ghislaine, now inheritor, watched from the shadows, her Oxford grooming complete, the vaults. Addition, promised diskettes, early spyware guiding her. Rainey sensed leverage, not pleasure. Herzliya logged it, vector, entertainment, politics. The women's names became intake markers, archived for a vault that never forgot. The event had been billed loosely as a calendar girl reception. Invitations floated through modeling agencies and college bulletin boards like whispers. Free airfare, designer fittings, champagne, and the possibility of a contract. In a city where social mobility was synonymous with proximity, the bait was irresistible. Trump played the host, loud and magnanimous with hands everywhere. Epstein, by contrast, moved like a ghost, silent, alert, drinking only Perrier from a crystal tumbler. He didn't flirt, he didn't engage, he observed, eyes scanning the edges, doorways, stairwells, the slow orbits of the girls from table to bar and back again. He rarely blinked. Ghislaine sat at the bar in a fitted velvet dress, sipping a gin martini and laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Her smile was performative, but her gaze wasn't. She saw everything, especially the girls, who wore borrowed shoes, who hadn't eaten, who kept checking their clutch for a phone that wouldn't ring. One of them, a brunette from Jacksonville, left with a Miami developer in a white Corvette. No one stopped her. No one asked. May 1992, Herzliya, Israel. The room was windowless, lit only by the pale glow of monitors and a few desk lamps tilted low. In the hum of processors and the quiet click of keys, the air felt thick, as if too many secrets had been exhaled into it over the years. This was the Herzliya Doctrine Annex, not the official headquarters, but the place where certain operations were monitored in near real time, far from the bureaucratic clutter upstairs. On the main console, streams of live data scrolled endlessly. Promise still had its place, spooling court records, travel manifests, and bank transfers, but now is just one input among many. There were flight reservation intercepts from European carriers, encrypted faxes pulled from compromised embassy machines, and transcriptions from private jet phone lines. Every feed fed into a shared archive, which analysts here had started calling the reserve. On the largest screen, clusters of movement patterns lit up in red and gold, mapping the habits of politicians, financiers, entertainers, people whose trajectories mattered. A name in red glowed at the center of one cluster, D. Trump. Beside it, an annotation scrolled slowly, movement pattern irregular, debt exposure escalating, Atlantic City assets volatile. At the next console over, another operator kept an eye on a different cluster. There the name W.J. Clinton pulsed, tied to a Toronto-bound charter flight under an alias. An analyst leaned over the telemetry officer's shoulder, eyes narrowing at the Trump data. "Clinton's feed stays warm," he said quietly, not looking away from the screen. "Trump's profile. Reserve it." The officer nodded once. In this room, reserve didn't mean shelve, it meant hold, not destroyed, not leaked, just set aside until the timing mattered. Information like this didn't age, it fermented. And when the day came to pour it, the effect would be stronger than if it had been used immediately. The officer's keystrokes left no mark in the system log. The Trump file slid silently from active surveillance into the deeper tier, the one without labels, the one that only a handful of terminals could access. The reserve was growing, and with it, the first outlines of something larger. June 1992, Manhattan. The third-floor study of the East 69th Street townhouse was coming together, though still obviously a construction site. You could now tell that it was in process of being repurposed into a grooming suite disguised as a personal library. But attention was starting to stir, not from law enforcement yet, but from realtors, mail clerks, and nosy society columnists who wondered who, precisely, owned a brooding limestone manse with no doorbell and a revolving cast of young female interns. It was time to add another layer of misdirection. The solution arrived in the form of Ivan Fisher, a defense attorney with a checkered past and a reputation for loyalty to the highest bidder. Fisher had once been disbarred and reinstated, his name floating in and out of legal scandal. He was neither clean nor curious. That made him perfect. A lease was drawn up, ostensibly transferring occupancy of the townhouse to Fisher for use as a boutique legal practice. The cover story was thin but effective, high-profile clients, sensitive casework, and the need for discretion. Epstein made certain the press release noted that Fisher handled matters requiring utmost privacy and institutional insulation. Fisher never lived there. He never even furnished a bedroom. But his name on the mailbox, and his firm's letterhead on the billing statements, created a vital legal fiction. The property, technically still under the frozen assets ledger of the Iranian state and overseen by the US State Department, slipped further into fog. A clerical ghost. Rent payments were made via trust instruments from a Cayman Islands shell. Invoices were inflated for consultations. The money moved through enough ledgers that even the IRS would have needed a red string map and a dozen subpoenas just to follow the scent. Fisher asked no questions, and when clients did inquire about the address, he waved them off with a practiced grin and a vague answer. An old family arrangement. By the time anyone noticed the irregularities, namely, a landlord without oversight and a tenant who never actually lived, $1, $2 years had passed. Lawsuits began to circle, mostly civil. The State Department pled ignorance, and Epstein had already moved on to the next firewall. August 1992, Little Rock, Arkansas. The rain came down in hard, slanting sheets, drumming against the windows of the small office just off Capitol Avenue. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the faint smell of developing fluid. On a scarred oak table, a spread of photographs lay like a hand of dangerous cards. Bill Clinton in various settings, some with donors, others in more intimate company. None were fit for campaign literature. A political consultant in rolled-up shirt sleeves leaned over the table, tapping one image with the back of a pen. "If the DNC ever sees this, we're done," he muttered. His voice carried the brittle edge of someone who knew the line between survival and ruin was a thin one. Across from him sat a man in an impeccably pressed tan suit. His expression was unreadable, his posture still. When he finally spoke, it was in a soft, almost melodic accent that the consultant couldn't quite place. "We don't destroy pictures," the man said evenly. "We bank them." The consultant frowned. "And if the bank gets robbed?" The visitor smiled faintly, as if amused by the question. "Then you chose the wrong bank." Outside, the rain hammered harder, its noise swallowing the low hum from the adjoining room, the faint, steady rhythm of a secure terminal scanning and cataloguing each photograph. No paper trail, no identifying metadata, only an encrypted index linking these images to a growing off-system archive. The files would not be used now. Not while Clinton was still useful. They would be stored alongside other leverage material, dossiers, recordings, account ledgers, in a hidden tier of the network, meant only for the most valuable assets. The kind that grew sharper with time, waiting for the right hands to knock. By the end of the night, the photographs were gone from the table, their negatives sealed and dispatched. The office returned to its quiet anonymity, and somewhere far from Little Rock, in a place without coordinates, the images slid silently into what operatives were now calling the vault. September 1992. London, United Kingdom. The Knightsbridge flat was a borrowed relic, its heavy drapes and cigarette-stained air a far cry from the polished menace of Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. Once a haven for foreign dignitaries, it now reeked of sour coffee and the fading arrogance of Robert Maxwell's empire. The September rain streaked the windows, blurring the streetlights below, as Jeffrey Epstein stood by a mahogany desk, his fingers tracing the edge of a leather blotter. 3 months after claiming the East 69th Street node, he was in London to secure the syndicate's objectives, navigating the wreckage of Maxwell's contacts. The air was thick with the weight of transition, every move a test of his ability to inherit a machine that had outlived its creator. Ghislaine Maxwell entered without knocking, her trench coat damp, her hair pulled into a tight chignon that sharpened her features. She carried a slim attaché case, its lock engraved with a cipher no one in the room would dare question. Her presence was a quiet command, her transatlantic accent crisp as she greeted the man seated across from Epstein, a former Mossad handler named Avi. His grey suit rumpled, his eyes heavy with the fatigue of a man who had seen too many secrets buried. Avi's role in Maxwell's network had been discreet, a conduit to Tel Aviv's intelligence pipelines, but his loyalty was now a question mark, his usefulness teetering since Robert's death, in November 1991. "You're late," Avi said, his voice low, accented with traces of Hebrew and suspicion. He leaned back in a chair that creaked under his weight, a dossier open before him, its pages marked with redacted names and coded notations. "This isn't Tel Aviv. We don't wait for stragglers." Epstein's smile was faint, calculated. "We're here now," he said, his tone smooth, unhurried. "And we're here to keep the lines open." He gestured to Ghislaine, who set the attaché case on the desk, her movements deliberate, as if handling a relic of her father's legacy. "Ghislaine has something you'll want to see." She unlatched the case, revealing a single item, a 3.5-inch floppy disk, its label handwritten in Robert Maxwell's blocky script, Promise 4.2. The disk was a key to the Vault's access, an updated version of the surveillance software that had been feeding data to Tel Aviv since the 1980s, its backdoors now capable of harvesting bank transactions, diplomatic cables, and private communications across 3 continents. Securing it had been Ghislaine's task, a high-stakes operation in Geneva the previous week, where she had charmed a French-Algerian programmer into handing over the update under the guise of a software audit for a humanitarian NGO. Her success had silenced doubters in Herzliya, proving her worth beyond her father's shadow. Avi's eyes narrowed, his fingers hovering over the disk without touching it. "You think this buys trust?" he asked, his voice edged with skepticism. Maxwell promised the same. "Look where that got him." Ghislaine's smile was sharp, her gaze unflinching. "My father promised too much and delivered too loudly. We're different. This," she tapped the disk, "is operational. It's live in Manhattan already. Tel Aviv's servers are syncing as we speak." Her voice carried the weight of her training, Herzliya's annexes having honed her charm into a weapon, her empathy a tool for extraction. Epstein leaned forward, his hands clasped, his demeanor that of a man who knew the game's rules better than its players. "We're not replacing Robert," he said. "We're refining him. The Vault doesn't need his theatrics, just his infrastructure. You want to keep your channels open, Avi. You know what happens if they close." The handler's jaw tightened, his fingers brushing the dossier, which contained fragments of Maxwell's last deals, a Zurich banker's wire transfers, a Riyadh diplomat's coded cables, a London fixer's meeting logs. These were the threads Epstein and Ghislaine had inherited, and Avi's role was to ensure they didn't fray. The threat was unspoken but clear. Refusal meant exposure, not just of Avi's ties to Maxwell but of his own indiscretions, archived in the Vault's growing nodes. Epstein's eyes met his, a silent acknowledgement of the leverage they held, a machine that thrived on usable shame. Avi exhaled, picking up the disk, his reluctance palpable. "This better work," he said, slipping it into his coat. "Herzliya's watching. They don't like surprises." Ghislaine's smile softened, disarming. "Then let's not surprise them," she said, closing the attaché case with a snap. "We'll handle the American side. You keep Tel Aviv happy." The meeting ended with a nod, not a handshake, the air heavy with the weight of their pact. Avi left through a side door, his silhouette swallowed by the rain, a courier waiting to whisk the disk to Herzliya. Epstein and Ghislaine remained in the flat, the silence between them charged with their shared ambition. She lit a cigarette, exhaling slowly, the smoke curling toward the ceiling's ornate molding. "He'll comply," she said, her voice low, certain. "He's too deep to walk away." Epstein nodded, his fingers tracing the dossier's edge. "He's not the only one," he said, his gaze drifting to the window, where London's lights blurred in the downpour. The syndicate's levers were theirs now, Maxwell's chaos distilled into their precision. They had secured the Promise update, a new data source that extended the syndicate's reach, and Avi's cooperation ensured the network's continuity. Their partnership, forged in the vacuum of Maxwell's fall, was no longer an experiment but a machine, its gears turning in Manhattan, London, Tel Aviv. That evening, in a dimly lit Knightsbridge club, they met a Zurich banker, one of Maxwell's last contacts, his hands trembling as he handed over a ledger of offshore accounts. Ghislaine's charm disarmed him, her questions precise, extracting names and codes without a raised voice. Epstein watched, his silence a counterpoint to her finesse, their dynamic a seamless dance of control. The banker left with a promise of protection, unaware his secrets were already filed in the Vault's archive. Back at the flat, Ghislaine poured scotch, her smile sharp as she raised her glass. "To continuity," she said. "And control," Epstein added, clinking her glass. They drank in silence, the rain a soft drum against the windows. October 1992, Santa Fe County, New Mexico. The high desert stretched, endlessly in every direction, its silence broken only by the rhythmic thump of rotor blades. Epstein's chartered helicopter descended toward a dusty clearing just beyond the skeletal frame of the main house. The late afternoon sun burned low, casting long shadows across the scrub and sandstone. From above, the land seemed empty, barren, the perfect canvas. The pilot cut the engine, and Epstein stepped down into the grit, his dark overcoat snapping in the wind. An architect followed, clutching a leather portfolio against the dust. Ghislaine emerged last, sunglasses hiding her expression, a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her hair. They walked the property slowly, past half-finished retaining walls and piles of rebar. Epstein said little, his gaze fixed not on the house but on a ridge that rose in the middle distance, a natural bluff where the wind seemed to pause. "That's where it goes," Epstein said, breaking the silence. His tone wasn't speculative. In the temporary construction trailer, the air was cool and smelled faintly of concrete dust and stale coffee. Blueprints lay across a drafting table under the dim hum of a desk lamp. They weren't the kind of plans realtors ever saw. No grand ballroom, no guest suites. Instead, reinforced corridors tunneled into the bluff, vaulted, climate-controlled chambers with biometric access points, a media review room encased in shielding to block wireless or radio frequencies, a central spine of hallway with numbered storage bays, branching off like ribs. The architect spoke quietly, as though the walls might hear. "If you want complete environmental isolation, we'll need everything," Epstein cut in. His eyes traced the deepest chamber on the plan, and double redundancy on the locks. "No mechanical failures, no lost keys." "It's for research," he added after a pause, as if the word might make the design sound mundane. Ghislaine, standing by the window, didn't turn from the view. "Sure," she said, voice dry. She didn't have to say what they both knew. This would be the first deep anchor point in the US for what their people in Herzliya and London were already coining as the Vault, the invisible, ever-growing archive of leverage, compromat, and intelligence they had been quietly assembling for years. But this was different. This was just the main physical storage archive for all the gathered material, the main physical hiding place to store America's most salacious and politically destructive records and material, hard copies, original negatives, tapes, and physical evidence too risky to digitize. Everything funneled here would be stripped from the public record, sealed in steel and concrete, and kept until it could be spent. Epstein leaned over the plans, tracing the path from the helipad to the vault entrance. "It should outlast us," he said finally, almost to himself. The architect nodded, marking adjustments with a pencil. Ghislaine pulled her scarf tighter against a gust that rattled the trailer walls. November 3, 1992, Manhattan, New York. The townhouse on East 69th Street stood silent under frosted streetlights. Velvet curtains sealed the windows, the air thick with leather travel bags and unease. The drawing room pulsed with CNN's election results ticker. Clinton ahead, behind, ahead again. Crystal decanters gleamed, staffers hovered, guests awaited results, the room wired for calculation beneath its candor. Ghislaine Maxwell stood by a window, her reflection sharp against the lamp's glow, fingers tapping a marble sill as city returns rolled in. Her tailored blazer masked her role, no longer Robert Maxwell's daughter, but the syndicate's operative, her father's chaotic empire distilled into her and Jeffrey Epstein's machine. Epstein stood apart, his sweater a contrast to the donors and media figures in tailored suits, their power in practiced smiles. He didn't clap as the maps turned blue for Clinton, noting who congratulated him first, who lingered. In Palm Beach, a Mar-a-Lago fundraiser saw guests raise glasses to new beginnings. Clinton's win marked a power shift, a new ledger of who mattered. Epstein's name was whispered, his Manhattan contacts feeding the vault names, politicians craving influence, bureaucrats seeking access. The election was a signal, and Epstein's network was poised to capture it. After midnight, the townhouse emptied, conversations thinning. A donor asked about flights, another about the transition. Staffers offered coats, chauffeurs idled outside. A courier packet on the mantel held a donor list, names implied, heavy with potential. Ghislaine tucked it under her coat, her movement fluid, honed in Herzliya's annexes. In the basement, behind false paneling, a contractor installed encryption gear, gloved hands silent. "More capacity," Epstein said. "People talk, we record." The setup was surgical, crates labeled in glyphic shorthand, an incinerator hidden, a Faraday cage shielding signals, an escape hatch masked as boiler piping. Cameras blinked in sconces, microphones caught every whisper. Epstein tracked signals, who reached for him, who offered support unasked. Ghislaine logged women, models, influencers, elites' daughters, who sought introductions or dodged cameras. Every handshake fed the vault's archive. Clinton's win stirred opportunity downstairs. Ghislaine leaned close, her breath warm with scotch. "They chase a seat at the table," she murmured. Epstein nodded, eyes on the blue map. "We give them strings." Their partnership, forged after Robert Maxwell's 1991 death, had solidified. His yacht accident ended his threats, leaving Epstein and Ghislaine to refine his levers. Zurich bankers, London fixers, Riyadh diplomats. A September London meeting secured a promise update, Ghislaine's charm extracting contacts. They were architects of adjacency, shaping power's orbit.